My son told me I couldn't come to his wedding, but what he didn't know was that I was there. With a surprise that would change everything forever. My name is Edgar Chapman. I'm 68 years old, and after 35 years serving as a Coast Guard officer in the rough waters off the Maine coast, I thought I'd earn some respect from my family. I was wrong. The call came on a Tuesday evening in October. I remember because I was watching the sunset from my small cabin in Bar Harbor, nursing a cup of black coffee and thinking about how proud I was that my son Michael had finally found someone to marry. At 32, he'd been a bachelor for so long that his mother, God rest her soul, used to joke that she'd never see grandchildren. "Dad, we need to talk." Michael's voice was cold, distant. Nothing like the boy who used to run to the dock every evening, waiting for my patrol boat to return. "Sure, son. What's on your mind?" There was a long pause. I could hear traffic in the background. He was calling from Boston, probably walking between his fancy law office buildings. "Dad. Helena and I have been talking, and we've decided that, well, we think it would be best if you didn't come to the wedding." The words hit me like a rogue wave. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean, Michael?" "Look, Dad, you know how you get at family gatherings. You drink too much, you tell those same old Coast Guard stories, and frankly, Helena's family is different. They're sophisticated people. Her father owns 3 restaurants in Cambridge, her mother is on the board of the Boston Symphony. We just think. You think I'd embarrass you?" The words came out flat, hollow. "It's not that simple, Dad. It's just, this is Helena's day, you know? Her dream wedding. And after what happened at Christmas. Christmas. When I'd had a few too many eggnogs and told Helena's pretentious brother exactly what I thought about his comments on blue-collar workers being the backbone of America, but not really suitable for polite conversation. Maybe I'd been a little rough around the edges, but the kid deserved it. "Michael, I raised you by myself after your mother died. I worked double shifts to pay for your college, your law school. I've never missed a birthday, never missed a graduation. Dad, please don't make this harder than it already is." The line went quiet except for the sound of my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. My son, my only child, the boy I'd rocked to sleep during those terrible storms when he was afraid, the kid I'd taught to tie knots and read the stars, was uninviting me to the most important day of his life. "Is this what Helena wants, or is this what you want?" I asked quietly. Another pause. "It's what we both want, Dad." "I'm sorry." The dial tone echoed in my empty cabin. I sat there for hours, staring at the phone, waiting for him to call back and tell me it was all a mistake, that he'd been kidding, that of course he wanted his old man at his wedding. He never called back. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the rocky shore behind my cabin, the same shore where I'd taught Michael to skip stones, where we'd built bonfires and roasted marshmallows, where he'd cried in my arms the night his mother died of cancer when he was just 16. The wedding was scheduled for November 15th at some fancy venue in Brookline. I knew because I'd already bought my suit, a navy blue one that cost me more than I'd spent on clothes in the past 5 years combined. It hung in my closet now like a ghost, tag still attached. For 3 weeks, I tried to respect his decision. I really did. I told myself that maybe he was right, maybe I didn't fit into his new life. Maybe a retired Coast Guard officer from a small Maine fishing town had no business at a high-society Boston wedding. But every morning when I woke up and looked at the picture on my nightstand, Michael at his high school graduation, both of us grinning like idiots, his arm around my shoulders, I felt something burning in my chest. Not anger, exactly. Something deeper. Something that felt like drowning. I'd spent my entire career saving people from the water. I'd pulled dozens of fishermen from sinking boats, rescued families from capsized sailboats, brought home boys who thought they were men until the Atlantic showed them otherwise. I'd saved lives, and I'd earned the respect of every person who'd ever served alongside me. But I couldn't save my relationship with my own son. 3 days before the wedding, I made a decision that would either repair our broken bond or destroy it forever. I picked up the phone and called my old Coast Guard buddy, Tommy Rodriguez, who'd retired to Boston 5 years ago. Edgar. How the hell are you, you old sea dog? Tommy, I need a favor. A big one. By the time I hung up, I had a plan. It was risky, maybe even foolish. But sometimes, when you're drowning, you have to take desperate measures to reach the surface. I wasn't going to miss my son's wedding. And I was going to make sure he knew exactly what kind of man his father really was. The navy suit came off its hanger that night. I pressed it carefully, polished my dress shoes until they gleamed, and pulled out the metal box I hadn't opened in 10 years. Inside, wrapped in velvet, were the commendations I'd earned over 3.5 decades of service, the Coast Guard Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, and the one I was most proud of, the Gold Life-Saving Medal I'd received for rescuing a family of 4 from a burning yacht during Hurricane Bob in 1991. Michael had been 11 years old then. He'd beamed with pride when they'd pinned that medal on my chest, telling everyone at school that his dad was a hero. I wondered when that had stopped mattering to him. The drive to Boston took 4 hours. I'd made the trip countless times over the years, for Michael's college events, his law school graduation, holidays when he'd still wanted me around. But this time felt different. This time, I was driving toward a confrontation that could end with me losing my son forever. Tommy met me at a diner in Cambridge at 6 in the morning on November 15th. He looked older than I remembered, gray stubble and lines around his eyes, but his handshake was still firm. You sure about this, Edgar? Once you walk in there, there's no going back. I thought about Michael as a little boy, how he used to sit on my lap while I told him stories about the ocean, about rescues and storms and the brotherhood of men who serve together. I thought about his mother, Sarah, and how she'd made me promise on her deathbed to always be there for our son, no matter what. I'm sure. Tommy handed me a small package. Inside was a waiter's uniform, black pants and white shirt, perfectly pressed. His nephew worked for the catering company handling the wedding. Carlos called in sick today, Tommy said with a wink. Funny how these things work out. The venue was everything I'd expected, marble floors, crystal chandeliers, flowers that probably cost more than my monthly pension check. Rich people's paradise. I slipped in through the service entrance, Tommy's instructions echoing in my head. Keep your head down, blend in, wait for your moment. The moment came during the reception. I'd watched from the kitchen as Michael and Helena exchanged vows, my throat tight with emotions I couldn't name. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, confident and grown up, but I could still see traces of the little boy who used to be afraid of thunderstorms. Helena was beautiful, I had to admit. Elegant and poised, exactly the kind of woman a successful lawyer should marry. But when she looked at Michael, I saw something calculating in her eyes, something that reminded me of the sharks that sometimes followed our patrol boats, waiting for an opportunity. The reception was in full swing when I finally made my move. The champagne was flowing, the band was playing some jazz number I didn't recognize, and the bride and groom were making their rounds, accepting congratulations from Boston's finest. I grabbed a champagne flute from the service station, straightened my borrowed uniform, and walked into the reception hall like I belonged there. Nobody paid attention to the aging waiter moving through the crowd. I was invisible, just another piece of the expensive machinery that made their perfect evening possible. But I wasn't planning to stay invisible for long. Before I continue this story that changed my life forever, if you're feeling the emotions I felt that night, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this ends. Moving through that reception hall was like navigating through a minefield. Every step could expose me, every glance from a guest could blow my cover. But 35 years in the Coast Guard teaches you how to stay calm under pressure, how to blend into your environment when your life depends on it. The Brookline Country Club was everything Michael had probably dreamed of for his wedding. Marble columns reached toward a ceiling painted with cherubs and golden clouds, crystal chandeliers cast rainbow patterns across the polished floor, and every table was decorated with white roses that must have cost more than most people's monthly rent. I watched my son from across the room, champagne flute trembling slightly in my hand. He was laughing at something Helena's father was saying, his head thrown back in that carefree way he used to laugh when he was 8 years old and I'd take him fishing off Cadillac Mountain. But there was something different about his smile now, more practiced, more careful. Like he was performing happiness instead of feeling it. Helena clung to his arm like expensive jewelry, perfectly positioned for every photograph. Her dress probably cost more than my truck, all flowing silk and intricate beadwork that caught the light with every movement. She was beautiful, no doubt about that, but there was something cold in her eyes when she looked at the guests, like she was calculating their net worth with every handshake. "Excuse me, waiter." I nearly jumped out of my skin. A woman in her 60s, dripping with pearls and attitude, was snapping her fingers at me. "Yes, ma'am." I kept my voice steady, grateful for the years of dealing with entitled yacht owners who thought money made them admirals. "These canapés are absolutely dreadful. Tell the kitchen to bring out something edible, won't you?" I bit back the response I wanted to give her and simply nodded. "Right away, ma'am." As I walked toward the kitchen, I caught fragments of conversations that made my stomach turn. Helena's friends gossiping about wedding costs. "Did you see the ice sculpture? It must have been 10,000 at least." Helena's mother complaining about the quaint little hometown boy her daughter was marrying, as if Michael's Harvard law degree somehow didn't count because he came from Maine. But the conversation that nearly broke my composure was between Helena and her maid of honor near the dessert table. "So when do you tell him about the prenup changes?" the friend was asking, her voice low but not low enough. Helena glanced around nervously. "After the honeymoon. Daddy's lawyer says it's better to establish financial boundaries early. Michael's sweet, but he has no idea how to handle real money. Did you know his father is some kind of fisherman or something? Coast Guard officer," I whispered to myself, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. "Well, whatever. The point is, Michael needs to understand that this marriage comes with certain expectations. I'm not going to let some small-town mentality drag down everything Daddy's built for me." I had to step into the service hallway to keep from saying something that would blow my cover. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from rage. This woman didn't love my son. She loved his Harvard credentials, his law firm partnership, the respectability he brought to her social circle. But she didn't love Michael, the boy who used to collect seashells for his dying mother, who cried when we had to put down our old dog Murphy, who once told me he wanted to be a Coast Guard officer just like his dad. When had I lost him? When had the son who used to hang on my every word started seeing me as an embarrassment? The answer came to me as I watched him across the room, posing for another photograph with Helena's family. It was gradual, like erosion wearing away at a coastline. College had been the beginning, new friends, new ideas, professors who taught him that success meant leaving your past behind. Law school had finished the job, surrounding him with people who measured worth in billable hours and country club memberships. But the real turning point had been Sarah's funeral. He was 16, angry at the world, angry at God, angry at me for not being able to save her. I'd thrown myself into work, picking up extra shifts because I didn't know how to deal with his grief on top of my own. By the time I realized he needed his father more than he needed financial security, he'd already started building walls around his heart. Maybe I'd failed him. Maybe I'd been so focused on providing for him that I'd forgotten to fight for him. But I wasn't going to fail him tonight. The band finished their jazz set and the bandleader stepped up to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to invite the father of the bride to say a few words." Helena's father, Richard Pemberton III, rose from the head table with the confidence of a man who'd never doubted his place in the world. His speech was polished, rehearsed, full of references to family traditions and bright futures. He talked about Helena like she was a prize he was awarding to Michael, a gift that came with terms and conditions. When he finished, there was polite applause, and I thought that would be the end of it. But then Helena's mother stood up. "I'd also like to say something," she announced, her voice carrying the authority of old money and older prejudices. "Michael, dear, welcome to the family. I know this is all very different from what you're used to, but don't worry, we'll teach you how things are done in proper society." The condescension in her voice made my skin crawl. A few guests chuckled uncomfortably, but Michael just smiled and nodded like a trained dog. "Of course," she continued, "it would have been lovely to meet Michael's father, but I understand he couldn't make it tonight. Work obligations, I'm sure. Work obligations. Like I was too busy pulling lobster traps to attend my own son's wedding. Michael's face went red, but he didn't correct her. He didn't stand up and defend me, didn't explain that he'd chosen not to invite me. He just sat there, letting this woman humiliate me in front of 200 strangers. That's when I knew I couldn't wait any longer. I set down my champagne flute and walked to the band station. The band leader looked confused when I approached, but I'd learned long ago that confidence could get you through most situations. Mind if I borrow that microphone for a moment? I asked quietly. There's something I need to say to my son. The man's eyes widened as he realized what was happening, but something in my expression must have convinced him not to argue. He handed me the microphone and stepped aside. The room gradually fell silent as I stood there, still in my waiter's uniform, holding the microphone like it was a life preserver. 200 pairs of eyes turned toward me, including my son's. Michael's face went white when he recognized me, his mouth falling open in shock. Good evening, everyone, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging in my chest. I'm Edgar Chapman. For those of you who were wondering, I'm Michael's father. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Helena's mother looked like she'd swallowed her pearls. Michael started to stand up, probably to stop me, but something in my eyes must have warned him to stay put. I know I wasn't invited tonight, I continued, but I figured a father should be present for his son's wedding, even if his son doesn't think he's good enough for the occasion. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. I know I wasn't invited tonight, I continued, but I figured a father should be present for his son's wedding, even if his son doesn't think he's good enough for the occasion. The silence in the room was deafening. Even the catering staff had stopped moving. But I wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. You see, 35 years ago, I made a promise to a dying woman, my wife, Michael's mother, that I would always be there for our son. Always. Through thick and thin, through good times and bad, through Coast Guard deployments and midnight fevers and teenage heartbreaks. My voice was getting stronger now, fed by decades of suppressed pain and disappointment. Michael looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. Helena's face had gone pale beneath her expensive makeup. Sarah, that was my wife's name, for those keeping track, she died when Michael was 16. Cancer took her piece by piece while I held her hand every night in that hospital room in Portland. Her last words to me weren't, "I love you," or, "Take care of yourself." They were, "Don't let our boy forget where he comes from." I could see some of the older guests dabbing at their eyes. Good. They needed to hear this. So imagine my surprise when that boy, now a successful lawyer, thanks to the double shifts I worked to pay for his education, calls me 3 weeks ago to tell me I'm not welcome at his wedding. Not because I'm a bad father, not because I haven't supported him every day of his life, but because I might embarrass him in front of his new family. Helena's mother started to stand up, probably to have me removed, but her husband grabbed her arm and pulled her back down. Smart man. This was going to play out one way or another. Mrs. Pemberton, I said, looking directly at Helena's mother, you mentioned work obligations keeping me away tonight. You're absolutely right. For 35 years, my work was saving lives. Pulling fishermen out of 60-foot swells during nor'easters. Rescuing families from burning boats. Bringing home sons and daughters who thought they were tougher than the Atlantic Ocean. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the metal case I'd brought with me. The gold life-saving medal caught the chandelier light as I held it up. This medal was awarded to me for rescuing the Morrison family during Hurricane Bob in 1991. 4 people, including a little girl about Michael's age at the time, would have drowned that night if my crew and I hadn't risked our lives to save them. Michael was so proud of me that day. He brought this medal to school for show and tell, told his whole class that his dad was a hero. I looked at my son, saw the conflict warring in his eyes. Part of him remembered that little boy who thought his father hung the moon. But part of him was already calculating the social damage this scene was causing. But apparently, being a hero doesn't make you sophisticated enough for Boston high society. Apparently, risking your life to save others doesn't qualify you for a seat at your own son's wedding. The room was so quiet you could hear the ice settling in the champagne buckets. I could feel the crowd's mood shifting, could sense their sympathy turning away from the bride and groom and toward the old man in the waiter's uniform. "Helena," I said, turning to my daughter-in-law, "I heard your conversation with your friend earlier. About the prenup changes, about teaching Michael how to handle real money, about how his small-town mentality might drag down what your daddy built for you." Helena's face went dead white. Michael whipped his head around to stare at his new wife, confusion and hurt flashing across his features. "Here's what I want to know," I continued, my voice rising. "What exactly do you think you're getting in this marriage?" Because the Michael I raised, the one who used to cry when he stepped on ants, who gave his allowance to the church collection every Sunday, who held his mother's hand while cancer ate her alive, that Michael wouldn't marry someone who saw him as a social climbing opportunity. I pause here to ask you, the viewer, a question that's been burning in my mind. What would you do if you were Helena right now? Would you stand up and defend your marriage, or would you let your father-in-law expose the truth about your real intentions? Tell me in the comments what you think. But Helena didn't stand up. She didn't defend anything. She just sat there, frozen, while her carefully constructed wedding fantasy crumbled around her. "Michael," I said, my voice softer now, more personal. "Do you remember the night your mother died? You were so angry, at God, at the doctors, at me for not being able to save her. You told me you hated me, that it should have been me instead of her." Tears were streaming down my face now, but I didn't care. This needed to be said. I understood that anger, son. Grief makes us say things we don't mean. But you know what I told you that night? I told you that no matter what happened, no matter how angry you got or how far you went in life, I would always love you. I would always be proud of you. And I would always be your father. Michael's composure finally cracked. I could see the tears starting in his eyes, see the wall he'd built around his heart beginning to crumble. "But somewhere along the way, you decided that having a Coast Guard officer for a father was something to be ashamed of. Somewhere along the way, you started believing that where you came from mattered less than where you were going." I raised my champagne glass, the one I'd been carrying around all evening like a prop in this elaborate charade. "So here's my toast," I said, my voice carrying to every corner of that elegant room. "To Michael Chapman, who used to dream of saving lives like his old man, but settled for saving face instead. To Helena, who got exactly the kind of husband she deserves, one who's willing to erase his past to fit into her future. And to all of you fine people, who just witnessed what happens when money tries to buy class but forgets to include character in the transaction." I downed the champagne in one gulp and set the empty glass on the nearest table. "Oh, and Michael?" I added, pulling off the waiter's apron and dropping it on the floor. "Your mother would be ashamed of you tonight. Not because you married above your station, but because you forgot that your station was always higher than you thought." The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't the shocked quiet of people witnessing an unexpected scene, it was the heavy, uncomfortable silence of people who just watched a man speak truths they didn't want to hear. Helena finally found her voice. "How dare you," she began, but I cut her off. "How dare I what? Love my son enough to show up when he needs to hear the truth? How dare I remind him that the blood in his veins comes from people who served something bigger than themselves?" I started walking toward the exit, but I wasn't done. "Not yet. You want to know the real tragedy here? It's not that my son didn't invite me to his wedding. It's that he married someone who convinced him his father's love wasn't worth having." I could hear Helena's mother starting to sputter about calling security, about having me arrested for trespassing. But I could also hear something else, scattered applause from some of the guests, people who understood what they'd just witnessed. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. Michael was standing now, tears streaming down his face, his whole body shaking. For a moment, our eyes met across that expensive, elegant room, and I saw my little boy again. The one who used to wait for me at the dock, who used to fall asleep listening to my stories, who used to tell everyone that his dad was a hero. "I love you, son," I said quietly, but in that silence, everyone heard it. I always have, and I always will. When you're ready to remember who you really are, you know where to find me." And then I walked out into the cold November night, leaving behind the most elegant wedding reception Boston had seen in years, and the most honest speech anyone in that room would ever hear. The parking lot was quiet except for the sound of my footsteps on the gravel and the distant hum of traffic from Route 9. I stood beside my old pickup truck for a moment, breathing in the crisp air, feeling the weight of 30 years of hurt lifting off my shoulders. I'd said what needed to be said. Whether it changed anything or not was no longer up to me. I was fishing my keys out of my pocket when I heard footsteps behind me. "Dad! Dad, wait!" I turned around to see Michael running toward me, his tuxedo jacket flapping in the wind, his bow tie undone and hanging loose around his neck. He looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past hour. "What do you want, Michael?" I asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the scene inside. He stopped a few feet away from me, breathing hard. I need to talk to you." "Now you want to talk? After you humiliated me in front of your new family? After you let your mother-in-law insult me while you sat there like a statue? Dad, please." His voice cracked like it used to when he was a teenager. "I know I screwed up. I know I've been screwing up for years." I leaned against my truck, studying my son's face in the parking lot lights. "What about your wife? Your reception? Your 200 guests? Helena is handling things inside. Her parents are trying to salvage the evening, pretending like nothing happened." He laughed bitterly. "They're good at that, pretending. And you're out here instead of in there with them." "Yeah." He rubbed his face with his hands. "Yeah, I am." We stood there in silence for a moment, two men who'd once been as close as a father and son could be, now separated by years of misunderstandings and pride. "Dad, what you said in there, about Mom, about the promises you made to her. Every word was true, son." "I know. That's what makes it so hard to hear." He kicked at a piece of gravel. "When did I become someone she'd be ashamed of?" The question hung in the cold air between us. I wanted to comfort him, to tell him he was wrong, but he deserved the truth. He'd gotten enough lies from the people who were supposed to love him. "It wasn't all at once," I said finally. "It was gradual. College changed you some, but that was natural. You were supposed to grow, supposed to see the world differently. Law school changed you more, but even then, you still called me every week, still came home for Christmas." "So when?" I sighed, watching my breath fog in the cold air. "I think it started when you met Helena. Or maybe when you started working at that big firm downtown, surrounding yourself with people who measured worth by bank account balances and zip codes. She's not as bad as you made her sound in there." I raised an eyebrow. "Isn't she?" Michael was quiet for a long moment. "The prenup thing. I didn't know about the changes she was planning. She told me it was standard stuff, protecting both our interests. And now? Now I'm wondering what else she hasn't told me." A door slammed somewhere across the parking lot. Helena's voice carried on the wind, sharp and angry, talking to someone, probably her parents, about damage control and family reputation. "She's beautiful, Michael. Educated, sophisticated, everything you thought you wanted. But does she love you, or does she love what you represent to her social circle?" "I thought she loved me," he said quietly. "I really did. Maybe she does, in her way. But love shouldn't make you ashamed of where you come from. Love shouldn't make you hide your family like they're some kind of embarrassment." Michael's shoulders sagged. "I hurt you. God, Dad, I hurt you so badly, and for what? To impress people who'll drop me the minute I'm not useful to them anymore?" "The question is," I said, pushing off from the truck, "what are you going to do about it?" Before he could answer, Helena appeared at the club's entrance, her wedding dress flowing behind her like a white flag of surrender. She was clearly upset, her perfect makeup smeared, her hair coming loose from its elaborate updo. "Michael," she called, her voice cutting through the night. Get back in here right now. My parents are trying to explain your father's outburst to the guests, and you need to apologize publicly for this embarrassment. Michael looked at me, then at Helena, then back at me. I could see the moment of decision in his eyes, the crossroads where he had to choose between the life he'd built and the man he used to be. No, he said, his voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. What did you say? Helena's voice went up an octave. I said no, Helena. I'm not going back in there to apologize for my father. If anyone should be apologizing, it's me. To him. Helena's mouth fell open. Are you out of your mind? Do you have any idea what this scene has cost us? What people are saying in there? Probably that they just heard the most honest speech of their lives, Michael replied. Helena's face twisted with rage. Honest? Your father just humiliated me in front of 300 of Boston's most important families. He called me a gold digger, Michael. In front of everyone. Did he lie? Michael asked quietly. The question hit Helena like a physical blow. She stood there for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. How dare you, after everything my family has done for you, after the connections we've provided, the doors we've opened. There it is, I said softly. The truth. It's always about what they've done for you, Michael. Never about what you mean to them. Helena whirled on me, her eyes blazing. This is all your fault. You couldn't stand seeing your son succeed, could you? You had to come here and poison him against his new family. His new family, I repeated. What about his old family? What about the family that raised him, that sacrificed for him, that loved him unconditionally? What family? Helena spat. A dead mother and a washed-up Coast Guard officer living in some fishing shack in Maine? That's not family, that's charity work. The words hit Michael like she'd slapped him. I watched something die in his eyes, watched the last of his illusions about this woman crumble into dust. Helena, he said, his voice deadly quiet, you just insulted my mother's memory. You called my father, a man who saved dozens of lives, who earned medals for valor, who worked himself to the bone to give me every opportunity, you called him charity work. Michael, I didn't mean. Yes, you did. You meant every word. He pulled his wedding ring off his finger and held it out to her. This marriage is over. Helena stared at the ring like it was a snake. You can't be serious. We just got married. Our entire life is planned out. Your life is planned out, Michael corrected. My life, my real life, starts with remembering who I really am. He walked over to me and held out his hand. After a moment, I took it. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm sorry for the phone call, I'm sorry for not inviting you, I'm sorry for letting them insult you. Most of all, I'm sorry for forgetting that being your son was never something to be ashamed of. It was something to be proud of. I pulled him into a hug, this man who was still my little boy, who still carried my blood and his mother's heart. It's okay, son. It's okay. Helena was still standing there, holding her wedding dress up off the gravel, tears of rage and disbelief streaming down her face. This isn't over, Michael. My father will destroy you. You'll never work in this city again. Michael pulled back from our embrace and looked at his soon-to-be ex-wife with something that might have been pity. Helena, I just realized something. I don't want to work in this city if it means becoming someone my parents wouldn't recognize. I'd rather be a fisherman in Maine with my dignity intact than a lawyer in Boston with my soul sold to the highest bidder. We left Helena standing in that parking lot, still in her wedding dress, still clutching the ring he'd given back to her. As we drove away in my old pickup truck, Michael had insisted on leaving with me. I caught a glimpse of her in the rearview mirror, looking small and alone under the parking lot lights. So what now? Michael asked as we headed toward the highway. Now we go home, I said. Back to Maine. Back to where you come from. What about my job? My apartment? My whole life here? I glanced over at him, this son I'd feared I'd lost forever. Michael, your whole life isn't in Boston. Your whole life is sitting right here in this truck, figuring out who you want to be from now on. He was quiet for a moment, then he started to laugh. Not bitter laughter, but real, genuine amusement. You know what's funny? For the first time in years, I feel free. Freedom's a good look on you, son. We drove through the night, back toward Bar Harbor, back toward the cabin where he'd grown up, back toward the life he tried so hard to leave behind. But this time, he wasn't running away from something, he was running toward it. 3 months later, Michael moved back to Maine permanently. He opened a small law practice in town, handling cases for fishermen and Coast Guard families, people who needed legal help but couldn't afford Boston prices. He never made the kind of money he'd made in the city, but he slept better at night. Helena's father did try to destroy his reputation, but it didn't matter. The people who mattered, the ones who knew what real character looked like, they stood by him. As for Helena, I heard through the grapevine that she remarried within a year, this time to a hedge fund manager from Connecticut. Someone told me her new husband came from the right kind of family. I wished her well. Some people need to learn their lessons the hard way, and some never learn them at all. But Michael learned his. And that night in the parking lot, when he chose his father over his fake life, when he chose truth over convenience, when he chose love over money, that night, he became the man his mother and I had always known he could be. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give your child is the courage to disappoint the wrong people. Sometimes love means showing up uninvited to tell the truth, even when it hurts. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's enough to save them. If this story moved you, if you felt Edgar's pain and Michael's redemption, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Share this story with someone who needs to remember that family isn't about perfection, it's about showing up, no matter what. What would you have done in Edgar's place? Tell us in the comments below. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for understanding that sometimes, the greatest act of love is refusing to let the people you care about forget who they really are.